In the popular image of medieval warfare, we picture knights in shining armor, grand charges across open fields, and castles under siege. But behind the spectacle were countless roles you've probably never heard of. Jobs that were often more dangerous than facing the enemy in open combat. From men digging tunnels beneath fortress walls in suffocating darkness, to soldiers carrying siege ladders under a storm of arrows, to those who stood exposed for hours just to protect others, these were the hidden lifelines of an army. They worked in the shadows, risked everything, and received almost none of the glory. This is the story of the deadliest jobs in a medieval army you've never heard of. Number 1. Hidden dangers. Behind the medieval battlefield. Most folks imagine medieval warfare as clashing swords, armored knights on horses, maybe a dramatic charge or two. But outside that spotlight, there were countless roles that were deadly in a completely different way. Men who dug tunnels under castle walls. The sappers worked in pitch darkness, reinforcing shafts with wooden beams, drilling air holes, all while listening for any sign of the enemy countermining to stop them. A single collapse, or the subtle shift of earth, could bury them alive. Others carried massive siege ladders across open ground, rushing toward battlements under a hail of arrows or boiling oil, often never reaching the wall. Then there were the pavise bearers, holding gigantic shields steady for crossbowmen to reload, bracing against splintering wood and the recoil of enemy fire all day with no chance to rest or fight back. Drummers beat the war rhythm in plain view, trying to keep formation in the chaos. Any disruption of their beat could trigger confusion, and enemy archers knew that. Meanwhile, the standard bearer held the flag high in honor, yes, but also a bullseye. He couldn't use a shield because he needed both hands for the pole, so he relied entirely on those around him for protection. And engineers manning siege machinery like ballistae or mangonels ended up operating right next to under-pressure wood and metal. A snapped rope or jammed mechanism could send deadly splinters flying. In the midst of that, night scouts crept through enemy camp or terrain in darkness, memorizing terrain and troop positions, all while risking enemy capture or fatal misstep. Supply wagons behind the lines were another weak point. Wagon guards patrolled isolated flanks, vulnerable to raiders who knew full well that disrupting supplies could starve an army into retreat without a single open clash. Digging ditches, filling moats, retrieving spent arrows from fields under fire. So many tasks that weren't heroic, but held the army's life together. These were not named in epic tales, but their roles meant the difference between winning or losing, life or death. Understanding medieval warfare fully means recognizing how war was waged not just by knights in shining armor, but by those who risked everything without glory, digging, carrying, holding the line, and hoping to return home alive. Number 2. Sappers and the Underground War. Imagine stepping into darkness, shovels in hand, with nothing but the echo of metal on stone. That's precisely the work of medieval sappers, specialized infantry, whose job was not to meet the enemy face to face, but to undermine walls from beneath. Their task required digging narrow tunnels, propping them with wooden supports, and creating just the right airflow to survive. Mistakes weren't just dangerous, they could be lethal. A single miscalculated collapse could trap the team in pitch-black silence. These men were trained for stealth, patience, and precision. They avoided open trenches, instead snaking toward enemy walls in zigzag patterns to minimize enemy fire, sometimes hiding behind protective gabions or mantlets while they inched forward. As they approached the fortification, they dug deeper, aiming to collapse a wall or tower by burning the wooden beams beneath it. Yet defenders knew this tactic all too well. They dug countermine secret tunnels aimed directly at the sappers' workings. Imagine being woken by the scraping of enemy picks nearby, then thrust into a deadly underground duel with no space to swing a sword freely. Conditions were relentlessly harsh. The air underground was stuffy, fouled by dust, sweat, and the risk of smoke if fuses were lit. Sappers had to watch for enemy sabotage. Water poured down shafts to drown them. Fires lit above to suffocate them. And since medieval sappers lacked explosives until later centuries, they relied on setting timber ablaze with fire or early ignition methods. knowing that timing and precision were crucial. One wrong spark or slightly misplaced prop could trigger collapse prematurely or too late. Their impact, though hidden, was immense. A successful undermining operation could bring down a section of wall in a matter of hours, enough to open the way for an assault and force a quick surrender. Siege outcomes often hinged on these underground gambits. At Carcassonne during the Albigensian Crusade, engineering teams brought down a tower by setting fire to supports under weak points. Armies recruited miners from regions famed for their skill like England's Forest of Dean to serve as sappers in major campaigns. Their ability to collapse defences quietly and efficiently made them assets many times more valuable than ordinary foot soldiers. Beyond physical danger, the psychological stakes were intense. Working in darkness with constant tension, knowing that the enemy might burst through at any moment, required extraordinary nerve. Unlike knights or commanders who gained fame, sappers were seldom remembered, yet their work altered history, often determining whether a castle held out or fell. Without acknowledging the silent sacrifices of these underground warriors, our view of medieval warfare remains incomplete. They were the unseen force that broke walls, paralyzed defenders, and turned the tide of battles beneath the surface where no glory was given, only survival. Number 3. Exposed roles under heavy fire. Some jobs in a medieval army weren't just dangerous, they were virtually death sentences. Think about the men tasked with carrying siege ladders. They sprinted across open ground, utterly unprotected, toward towering walls as enemy archers rained arrows and stones from above. It wasn't just the rain of projectiles. Boiling liquid and molten pitch were favorites for defenders. These laddermen had to plant their ladders fast or risk being sliced down before they even reached their footing. But the ladder carriers were only one part of the deadly front line. Pavise bearers, the soldiers holding large wooden shields to protect crossbowmen while they reloaded, had a different kind of exposure. These shields were huge and cumbersome. Holding one up took both hands, making fighting back nearly impossible. Worse, the shields splintered under attack, sending shards into their bearers. Their job was to be human walls, absorbing arrows so others could fire back no glory, just relentless danger. Then there were the standard bearers. Carrying the flag was a high honor, yes, but also a tall target placed center stage. With both hands occupied holding the banner, they had only a small round shield, if that. They depended entirely on their comrades for protection. Should the bearer fall, that unit's morale could unravel in seconds. Not just a symbol of leadership, the banner was a rallying point, but with that came lethal visibility. These bearers had to stand their ground even when they couldn't fight back effectively, trusting that others would keep them alive. What's common across these roles is constant, deadly exposure without recourse. Ladder carriers sprint, pavise bearers stand immobile, and flag holders stay conspicuous, all under constant attack, all essential to maintain pressure or order. And, despite the lack of fame or praise, the success of an assault often depended on these men. If ladders didn't get placed, attackers stayed out of range. Without pavises, crossbowmen couldn't reload safely. Without the standard, troops lost their orientation and cohesion. What's often forgotten is how much training and discipline these jobs required. Ladder crews practiced handling massive, unwieldy beams as units so they could move quickly as one, even under arrow fire. Pavise bearers needed strength and endurance. Holding a heavy shield while tense and still, for minutes or even hours, took stamina. Standard bearers had to steady themselves in the chaos and resist dropping what they carried, no matter how fierce the battle. These roles were also psychological crucibles. Imagine holding a ladder across no man's land, seeing the wall inch closer, knowing if you slow, you die. Or, standing there, shield braced against bolts, stripped of agency, just hoping you don't break. For banner carriers, it was the weight of identity. The colors they held meant something bigger than themselves, yet they couldn't fight, only embody. Surprisingly, various medieval sources hint that some of these roles came with pay raises or specific selection. Pavise bearers, for instance, were considered skilled and sometimes paid more than the archers they shielded. This reveals that commanders recognized the strain and value of these jobs, even if history rarely did. These men weren't knighthood legends or chronicled heroes. They were the unseen backbone of every successful charge or formation. Without them, battles couldn't start, formations fell apart, and assaults failed. Yet their stories remain tucked away behind more celebrated exploits. Number 4. The siege within a siege. In a medieval siege, the real battle often unfolded in layers beneath and beyond the obvious clash at the walls, turning the entire camp and surrounding terrain into a live chessboard of constant threat. Defenders frequently dispatched night scouts deep into the besiegers' lines, not to spark pitched clashes, but to stealthily steal food, tar pillars, or even sabotage critical siege engines. This wasn't reckless heroism. It was calculated disruption. Extinguish camps' fire, send alarms, force them to redistribute guards. Meanwhile, attackers used fire pots filled with flaming pitch or oil, lobbed over walls to burn war engines, and sow panic among defenders. Those glassy, glowing orbs weren't just weapons. They were psychological spikes, making every silent night crackle with anxiety. Then there were the arrow collectors crawling the fields, or damps of the moat under the flickering shadows of lanterns, snatching spent but reusable bolts and arrows when the defenders' archers faltered. Recovering just a handful could stretch supplies significantly when resupply was slow or cut off. Supply wagons, usually tucked behind lines, endured constant harassment from raiders or defenders' sorties aiming to cut off food and ammunition. The guards assigned to these convoys weren't glamorous. They patrolled exposed, often muddy ground, fending off sudden, brutal raids that happened when the main army was least expecting them. Simultaneously, as attackers tried to bring machinery closer, so as to breach walls or fill moats, specialized soldiers lugged earth, debris, even animal carcasses into defensive ditches under relentless fire. The stakes were corporeal and urgent. Each bucketful of soil or stone enlarged the path for siege towers, but exposed every laborer to arrows, boiling oil, and rocks cascading from above. It's easy to romanticize the shiny clash atop battlements, yet the real endurance was tested in these background roles. Night operatives who delivered terror through stealth, fire wielders who turned darkness into danger, and lug and dash crews who filled ditches while the walls rained havoc down on them. Each task required nerves as sharp as any sword, physical grit matched by mental focus, and an acceptance that even routine duties might end in collapse or burn. No chronicler penned odes to the arrow fetchers or muck carriers, yet without them, castles would have stood stronger, or supply lines failed sooner, and sieges crumbled, or lingered to starve the attackers instead. Understanding siege warfare means seeing it as a multi-dimensional struggle. One where the obvious battle is only the surface, and the real stakes are buried in the wet earth, the snatched night raids, the flick of a firepot, and the lives of those among the unheralded ranks who made victory or defeat real. Number 5. The psychological toll. Living with the knowledge that your job is essentially the first to face death time, and again cracks even the strongest souls. Night sentinels, tasked with guarding camps after dark, endured bone-deep cold and constant fatigue, knowing that one lapse just one could open their camp to enemy infiltration. Without hope of recognition or reward, they fought sleep itself, the greatest enemy in stillness. Scouts sent into the enemy's heart faced a different kind of terror. Every step into unfamiliar territory carried the risk of capture, and capture could mean torture or worse. The mind honors living comrades, but the terror of what might come when you're caught, or the silence of an abandoned supply line, forged a weight that could crush the spirit quicker than a sword. Medieval warriors weren't shielded from mental strain simply because they were trained to fight. Chroniclers like Geoffroy de Charny warned that even conditioned knights felt fear-strangling resolve, especially when you're thirsty, hungry, sleep-deprived, and facing death not just theirs, but the fear of failing your unit or cause. A responsibility heavier than any shield. And beyond stress, ancient writings hint at a kind of lingering trauma. Nightmares, intrusive memories, a restless mind that refused peace. PTSD wasn't named back then, but the symptoms, night terrors, hypervigilance, detachment were there, undeniable and unspoken in the face of societal norms that expected stoicism. Then there's the unheralded grief of the supply lines. Wagon guards didn't just repel raiders. They carried the weight of survival for an army. When ambushed, they faced not only physical peril, but psychological erosion fear of their charge failing, of rations dwindling, of entire campaigns collapsing under subtle chaos. Every step they guarded, every rear they held, reinforced how fragile the whole army's life really was. When the dust settled, these individuals received no applause. Victory songs celebrated knights and banners, but not the watchers, the fetchers, the silent sufferers. For many, the goal wasn't glory, but survival returning home intact, physically and mentally, a small triumph ignored by history. Yet without their hidden watch and quiet resilience, sieges would stretch longer, scouts lost, morale fray, and victory slip through the cracks. Recognizing their mental endurance reveals that medieval warfare was fought not only in dusty fields, but inside the minds of those pushing through trauma in silence. Their untold toll shapes our understanding of war's true cost, one not measured in swords drawn, but in minds that held on, day after nightmarish day. Number 6. Legacy and Forgotten Sacrifice. In medieval sieges and battles, the heroes celebrated in stories are often knights astride war horses, waving banners amid triumphant charges. But the real engines of warfare were those who stayed unseen, unsung, yet indispensable. Imagine sappers laboring underground, undermining walls inch by lethal inch. Pavise bearers bracing massive shields, absorbing arrows so crossbowmen could reload in relative safety. Messengers darting through chaos to relay orders that maintained formations. Watchers pacing the ramparts at night, vigilant against enemy surprise attacks. Wagon guards fending off ambushes to keep supplies flowing. No chronicler paused to name them, yet their presence was woven into the very fabric of victory. Without their sweat, courage, and silent coordination, the elegant charge of the knight could unravel before it even began. Their significance echoes in how medieval armies functioned as systems rather than theatrical displays. A mismatched moment, no fresh arrows because retrievers were suppressed, no open path because sappers failed, or a broken line due to a fallen standard bearer could topple a seemingly invincible force. Yet, when castles fell or battles turned, history credited valor and strategy, not the pick-wielding sapper, the banner holder cut down before dawn, or the courier slain mid-message. Their sacrifice faded with the dust of the field. The underdog role of these soldiers is even more striking when we consider hierarchies of the time. Contemporary authorities divided society into those who fought, those who prayed, and those who worked, but rarely celebrated the workers whose toil literally built victory. Chronicles and art-privileged nobility and spectacle, the common soldier, the support crew, the underground tunnelers, remained invisible. Their contributions were practical, not poetic, yet without them, no duke's triumph, no siege lifted, no victory prolonged. But their legacy persists in the mechanics of medieval warfare. The sapping tunnels that crumbled walls, the meticulously placed pavises that turned the tide, the supply trains unharmed due to vigilant guard. These were the gears in an invisible machine. Modern historians now slowly piece together their stories, understanding that medieval war wasn't just about lance and armor. It was a complex network of logistics, endurance, and risk borne by those with none of the glory. Acknowledging their roles reshapes our understanding of the age. It moves us from romanticized duels to grim, precise orchestration of survival. It reminds us that real resilience comes not from flaring swords, but from whispered orders kept alive across the darkness. Shoulders holding shields when arrows rained, hands steadying banners despite fear, fingers retrieving arrows under fire, and bodies filling the voids left by walls and supply lines. Their sacrifice forgotten, but foundational turns what we once saw as theater into a raw human struggle, where victory was forged not in sunlight, but in the mud, the heat, the exhaustion, and the unspoken courage of the unseen.